best problems are actually given to us by our users. There's a little bit of an art of asking the right questions so that they tell you. Customers are also terrible at giving you solutions, so don't take solutions from them.
How have you ensured that your PMs love engineers and your engineers love PMs? Quite rare.
We put them in a ring and ask them to find out.
How do you hire PMs?
We measured 3 things: bias for action,
Vibhav, just would be great to sort of just set context on what MPL does and what has been the biggest challenge for MPL when it comes to product building, given that it deals with real money and teenagers who have no control over money. So tell us more.
MPL is a gaming platform. We are live in India. It started in India. We have about 100 million odd people who have installed the app. We're also live with a very similar version of the app in the US and in Nigeria. We do paid competitions. Some people call it real money gaming, some call it paid competition, but essentially there is competitions across various genre of games. We have like 25 odd games. There's a continuous competition going on in each of those games. There's an entry fee. And then there is a leaderboard / different formats where people can win and earn money. And an MPL takes a tournament fee for hosting the tournament. So that's essentially what the company does. We also have ventured into the free-to-play space, that is through Google Play Store distribution, and there are a couple of small properties that we have there, but it's a very small part of, let's call it the 0 to 1 journey when the main business is actually paid competition. And in addition to that, we have a couple of other properties which are more an acquisition. So we acquired a company in Germany. We have our own in-house studio called Mayhem Studios. These are businesses outside of paid competition, but equally important for us because it adds to the overall group. So that's what the company does. And in terms of challenges, the fidelity of the game and the performance of the game has to be much, much higher than the games that you'd have played on the phone just casually. If a Candy Crush hangs, I don't think you'd have a big issue. You just open the game again and play. But if you are playing a paid tournament and then if the game hangs and if you lose, you would be very upset. In fact, people churn very fast. For every issue they have when it comes to paid competitions, people are very, very serious about it. And the issues, we see most people actually just leaving the platform and they lose trust, right? In addition, there are things like safety and responsible gaming, et cetera, where we need to make sure that the right people are entering the right competition for the right skill score, or skill that is commensurate to who the other players are. So we need to ensure that we handhold them through that journey. We also need to make sure that there is no cheating that's happening in the system. With so many users and with a lot of money at stake and big grand competitions, people do try to hack into the app and do a whole bunch of very interesting things to make money. So we do have very, very sophisticated anti-cheat mechanisms. So these are some of the challenges. But net, we need a very, very performant, trustworthy app, which millions of people can use at any given point of time. That's built for scale.
Awesome. How does a new idea germinate at MPL and how does it become a real game? I imagine you guys have to constantly be creating, right?
Yeah. So the game, I would say that's probably the best part of my job, which is to build new games. Yeah. So it's actually a pretty long and elaborate process. We start with similar to it's a production. We call it game production, which is what happens at most studios. We follow a very similar process. So there's a conceptualization of the game. We work very closely with counterparts like the legal team and the business team and so on. But essentially, we come up with a game concept, which the game designers and the product managers do together. And once we have a prototype of that game. We have the concept, then we build into a prototype, then we get actually players to come and play. We get a good sense of what they like, what they don't like. We screen record a lot of these things. We go back to the drawing board, make a few more changes, and through my time at MPL, I've probably launched close to like 80 to 100 odd games, right? Out of which I want to say like 80% of them haven't worked, but 20% have, which makes up for all the difference, right? So we also know through this some institutional learning on what works and what doesn't.
Yeah.
So our hit rate is much better today than say what it was 2 years ago. And then we go on and we actually build the game, and then we have a method of going to market where we open it out to a small set of users, get feedback, make more changes, and iterate. End to end, it's like a 2 to 3 quarter effort to get a game up and running at full scale. Right? So that's sort of a sneak peek into what the development process looks like.
How do you keep the PM motivated when the game has not worked?
So one of the things that we do at MPL is we tell the PM that, look, launch is the very start of the product journey, right? There is, that's literally the start. It's not. I think a lot of PMs have a feeling that you launch a feature, you launch a game, or you launch a service, and then it's done, right? And then it's in production, and then it's done. For us, we think of it as milestone 1, and then there's a lot to be done after that, right? So in games that don't work, usually we go back and think through why it hasn't worked, and we usually seek out one of two answers. That there is a whole bunch of other things that we want to do to get this to a state where it can work, or we seek an answer to say this will never work for our audience, right? And if it's the latter, then we'd want to see how we don't repeat that mistake, where we went wrong. Both are equally useful, because the games that don't work builds institutional knowledge. And then the games that require you to iterate actually builds the iteration muscle for the PM. And then, scale is infinite because this industry is growing so fast.
Okay.
So either ways, it's a success. So I think the PMs at MPL understand that. What definitely is not a success is launching and giving up and not knowing why things worked. If they did, that's also a failure for us. Just saying this will not work without like very thoughtful, rational explanation. So anything that doesn't build institutional knowledge, or anything that's just very, very slow and low velocity shipping, I think those are things that that don't work for us. But the other parts, any of the other scenarios is totally fine. So in fact, we encourage them to, like, if the features don't work or if they've failed, we're very happy killing stuff and moving forward, and that does not reflect poorly on the PM or any of that. Failure is part of launching.
Awesome. Yeah. What is the most surprising institutional learning that you've built?
Specifically for gaming, there are a few different examples, but I'll give the overall crux of it. There are trade-offs where you can make short-term revenue, but lose out on long-term user retention. And there are many such examples within the game. And that is very surprising, because in a lot of other industries, if you're able to continuously make money from or monetize the user, usually it doesn't affect any of the matrices negatively. But games is one of those few areas, in my experience, where if you over monetize a user, you risk a lot of churn very quickly. And actually, in the long term, it becomes a very big problem. And we have actually seen games that were perfectly well balanced, where you're monetizing just the right amount, and we over monetize the user, and the business just collapsed like 50%. You won't even know, because it's like a fall off the cliff as users churn out. So that was a very interesting learning.
Several companies grew mad during COVID, hiring, scale, number of people that use the platform, and then you guys had to kind of regroup, lay off a bunch of folks.
Yeah.
How was that process? What did you learn from it, and how do you feel today about it?
Yeah, so we did do this. I want to say we did that partly also because of some regulatory changes.
Correct.
with the finance ministry waking up and deciding to tax us many times more than what they had historically done. So obviously, loss in revenue did force us to take a look back and see what we had to do. It was a painful process. Nobody likes to downsize. It's not the most exciting thing, it also hits the morale of the team. It's difficult for everybody involved, but it's also one of those necessary steps that I think you need to take. For us, it's worked out very positively because we've been able to bring back a lot of focus in terms of what we really need to launch, and more importantly, things that we aren't so important in terms of our goals and where we want to get to over the next 1 year or so. So it's actually worked really, really well. I think you were saying doing more with less, and that's what has happened. In fact, I will say that the velocity of shipping, the number of features we have launched, and the pace of our revenue growth has never been slower. It's only gotten even faster. So that's super exciting. And I think we took the right steps, and we've been able to obviously do a lot more with a lot less. So, yeah.
How did you guys bring that focus? Like, share some tactical stuff that people can take away and do more with.
Sure. So we follow a specific process within MPL, right? So for us, product, engineering, business, we have representatives from all of these different verticals. We sit together, and at least at the leadership level, we sort of decide what our key themes are. And then we say, okay, these are our key themes, and these are most important for the business over the next quarter or so. We call it the quarterly roadmap planning process. And then we let the teams, so and then we then staff the teams with different pods. So the pod for us is a self-sustained or self-sufficient set of individuals who can actually go and ship. So it'll have designers, product managers, engineers, quality assurance folks, data analysts, and so on and so forth. So we have a bunch of pods, and then we staff the pods, and then we let the PMs with their pods decide what they want to ship. We play a very active role in defining problem statements, but we let the PMs and the pods decide what kind of solutions they want to come up with. They know what kind of staffing they have, what kind of capacity they have to what they can build over the quarter, and they have the independence to build whatever they want. We will opine on or give feedback, but ultimately it's the PM's. The decision making is his or hers. So that's really helped us because we were able to say, okay, these are our key themes and problem areas. And then the PMs went back and thought through very creative solutions. And we've been able to do that now we've been following this for almost 8 quarters now. And it's reduced we call it the entropy within the company. Yeah. So it dropped the entropy. People have a lot of freedom. They're super excited because nobody's like micromanaging what they're doing, etc.
Yeah.
And then, if they do a great job, they'll get additional staffing the next quarter. If it's not so good, then we will start reducing so it's almost like the law of economics. So the better you do, the more folks you'll have and the more you can launch. And then, and then you can just continue.
What has been different in how you operate during COVID and now that it's more focused? Like, how have you driven focus? I bet the leadership conversation alignment happened before as well. Right?
Yes, so we did. I would say a couple of things. So since you mentioned COVID to post-COVID, we work from the office.
Yes.
So we all go to the office. I know that these people actually exist and they are real. Okay, so they actually sit. We are able to make jokes. We can share lunch. We can have coffee. We can go out for drinks. It's a big change.
Yeah.
And I enjoy it, and I think the teams really enjoy it. So that's one big difference. Yeah. Not that it made any difference from a focus standpoint, but all the serendipitous conversations actually really, I believe it's extremely helpful when you're trying to innovate. I think it's different when you're in certain functions or maybe in certain companies who don't really innovate as much. I think it's totally fine. For us, it absolutely did not work with COVID. We cannot design a game with 4 people in 4 different parts of India trying to figure this. It's just not.
Yeah.
Right. So that was one big difference. I think the second thing is, look, in terms of focus, focus also means you know what metrics you really want to move. You need to be able to measure those metrics very, very clearly, whether that's through an A/B tool or whether it's through your own systems. You need to be very clear. So for us, focus also meant clear translation of what problems it is to where your metric is today to where you want to move the metric, and all of those okay or not. So we do regular OKR check-ins. Only thing we look at is at least with leadership, we have specific problem-solving sessions where we go through solutions, etc. But post-launch, you're very, very critical in terms of how the metrics are evaluated and how much they have moved and how much do they need to move for us to be in a comfortable position. So I think that is one very, very key part of bringing focus to the teams. I also think automatically fewer people means people just get focused. There is
Yeah.
fewer options, right? So you are forced to take prioritization calls constantly, which means that most PMs err on actually launching things faster than waiting and trying to like debate out and so on. So it just become less chaotic and we are able to move much faster. I think that's the other part of just shipping faster, which automatically meant fewer things that they're doing, break down all these large, humongous projects. We don't do any humongous projects anymore. Earlier, I remember like we'd have these features which are like estimates of 3 months and I don't know, like so many. It's just,
Cycles.
yeah, it just sounds like something that would happen at like one of these very, very old school large companies. And now it's all quick. 2 weeks, get the results, then move ahead. 2 weeks, so everything is piecemeal. We've been able to move much faster.
What makes it extremely difficult is to move at 2 week pace for a system that has to be so robust and
Right.
performant. That involves extreme levels of creativity because you have to ship something new all the time. How does that get balanced?
What we did was we forced the PMs to launch faster, but also for it to be performant. Okay, while it sounds like a paradox, it actually is not. They've all found very, very clever ways of figuring this out. So they launch in 2 weeks, but they will launch to a very small cohort of users. Then they get the results that they need, and then they scale up a little bit more. But these are not systems that you can have frameworks for each of this, because in certain cases maybe you can do it for 100 users. Certain cases maybe you just open this out in lean hours, which may be like a 4 a.m. to like a 7 a.m., right? Because it's not possible to control the blast radius. But in these kind of constraints, we have actually seen that PMs become more creative. It's not that they feel like, oh my God, this is like some paradox and I don't know what to do. They come back with very, very creative solutions. Some of them have figured out how to version the app, right? So I will update a set of users here, but not update for a whole bunch of users. So there are various systems that have come into existence because of this constraint that we levied, and that's actually helped us tremendously. And now a solution that has been developed in one pod can be translated across other pods as well, or other geographies. So that's the way we have handled it.
Nice. What was the thought process in going international, and what kind of team structure does that entail?
Going international was very important for us for a few different reasons. One is, of course, geographical diversification overall reduces our risk, right? Because you don't, like for example, we got taxed in India, but we are not taxed in the US or in Africa or in Europe. So it reduces at a very strategic level, reduces certain risk, or risk profile is viewed differently. But from a building standpoint, nothing changes, right? We actually experimented with having a separate team and having like separate set of PMs handling different geos, etc. That didn't work. It was a terrible idea. Today we have one team. We have the same PMs managing all geos, and it works beautifully because they work very closely with engineering product have to work very closely, and we have very, very good relationship between our engineering and product teams. Bifurcating them, having different PMs manage the same app but in a different geo, etc., didn't work for us. What really worked is there's clear ownership between it's like a central team, just that the flavor of the app is slightly different. PMs are more than well equipped and they had more than enough time on their hands to be able to figure this out. So that's the way we have organized ourselves. So no real change from an execution standpoint on product and engineering. We do have slightly separate teams from a marketing standpoint because that is different.
Yeah.
But the engine that actually builds and ships games, etc., is the same team.
How have you ensured that your PMs love engineers and your engineers love PMs? Quite rare.
We put them in a ring and ask them to fight. No, that doesn't work. I think what's important is aligning of incentives, right? So what the engineering team and the product team, what they're chasing is the same thing. Their success or their failure depends on the success of that pod and what metric they're moving. So we have actually educated the engineering team, and they're they understand all these numbers. They understand what it means to say, hey, look, I want my engagement to go from X to Y, and they understand what it means. We also encourage them to ask questions when we are discussing like a product spec. So usually engineers, back in the day, engineers were told what to do.
Yeah.
Now they play an active role in actually conceptualizing and building with the product team. Everybody loves to build, right? Like when the engineering team is actually involved in the conceptualization phase and they can ask the questions that there's always been in their mind, they feel like they're also part of the process of building and they enjoy it. And then, of course, we're all measured with the same. The pod as either succeeds as a whole or they fail as a whole. I think that's made the big difference.
I think it's the pod structure because they're all contained. But you said something which is engineers are involved while there is conceptualization of the feature or the product. Can you harp a little bit on that and go into the detail of what the process of product building looks like?
Sure.
And when do these engineers get involved? When is the right time to involve these designers? And what is the framework of balance in terms of when your opinion versus their opinion? How do you kind of balance that?
Yeah, so the process of building starts with this, you have a problem statement that you're tackling. We don't build any solutions without knowing what the problem statement is. We have had instances in the past where solutions were built and then it wasn't clear why they was even built. Because it changes, right? Like the issues in the business changes over time.
Give us one example of you had a solution but didn't have a problem. I think everybody's going to relate to this.
So I'll give one example of, we had various problems at different points of time, okay, but the solution remained the same. So we had this thing where we were like, hey, look, we want more people to be invited to the app. So we did this thing called Play with Friends, right? So you can invite your friends, you guys can play certain games together. So first it started off as, how do we have like what's traditionally called a product-led growth feature within the app, right? So I can invite someone, I invite Mona and she comes in. So it means that the product in itself is able to get more and more people. Somewhere in the middle, that was no longer a problem because our acquisition was working fine. So then this became a solution for adding on more revenue because you could do user-generated tournaments, right? It's the same feature packaged and called slightly differently because we wanted to get more revenues out of a certain set of users. And then after a while, it was not clear why this was even there. And then the pod was killed. So these kind of things we have learned to avoid, right? Where somebody conceptualized something for a problem, and then the problem statement's forgotten, the solution exists, and then it's just, you're given, and it's difficult for the PM because the PM is now handed over like a project. He or she doesn't know if it's good to kill it, or do I continue working on this? It's confusing, right? So we don't want to put them in that sort of spot. So we are very clear on what problem statement it is. And then we know, okay, this solution is supposed to solve that problem statement. And we will make sure that that is recorded and it's there. And then the conceptualization would be something like this. The product manager writes the spec. Depending on how impactful that feature is, it may or may not be discussed with a broader forum within the product team. And then we discuss it, etc. And then we have sort of like a 80% ready spec. And that's when the designers and the engineers will critique the spec. They go through it. And often they come at it from a different lens. They're usually not, most people, because you have written the spec, you feel like if somebody asks a question, they're attacking the spec and there's something wrong. It's usually not the case. They're coming at it from their perspective. They're coming at it from an engineering perspective to say, hey guys, why don't you change this? Because then the app will be more performant.
Yeah.
Or why don't you do something else so that latency is lower? They have, right? So we encourage PMs to understand why they're asking the question they're asking, so that they're actually trying to make the product better, and they're usually not saying this is a feature that won't work. Usually you'll never hear that. They're coming at it from their perspective. Similarly, for the design team, they might be like, hey, look, if you do this, you might have more rage apps or whatever that they are coming at it from. So then it actually becomes more like the spec becomes much better before it's even launched, when you hear their feedback well. And then it actually goes into a final spec, there's a design walkthrough, and then there's like the whole building. Usually we get the product team to test every feature that they're launching. So good PMs would have tested it in like a more controlled quality. We call it the QE environment, which is not open to all of the other players, but maybe a small set of users. So good PMs will usually play that, and then if there's any additional changes, etc., it goes back. But that's sort of the process.
Have you guys always had the pod structure, or was it different before?
We always had some version of the pod structure, but combining that with the problem statement, the themes, and the metrics is something that's happened, I want to say, like maybe 8 quarters or so, maybe 1.5 years. Yeah.
In the pod structure, I imagine that the PM kind of keeps moving, right? Or are they part of the same pod solving the same problem for a long period of time?
So they won't solve the same problem, but they may be in the same pod. Usually what we have seen is that a PM, to have meaningful impact, it takes about a year in a pod. Once they've done it for a year, then we sort of discuss with the PM to say, hey, do you want to continue in this pod? Do you want to take on some other problem outside in another pod? Or do you want to handle multiple pods, right? So depending on seniority of the person, et cetera, it might be one of these paths. But what we have generally seen is most PMs want to handle multiple pods over time. So that's what it's moved towards more organically. And then there are some very good PMs who come back after 3 or 4 quarters and say that we have squeezed all the juice out of this. Anything more will only going to harm the product. Usually that judgment call is done by me, but some very good PMs will come and give me that input, and then we discuss that, and then the pod is killed. We kill it. Because if you give any additional, if you give a PM engineers, they will build a roadmap. Okay, they will figure out.
It's the line of the universe.
Yeah. So then the only way is to kill the pod so that there is no more. It's done. Move to the next year.
But when it gets killed, what happens?
Well, then we form bigger problems for the company, and new pods are formed.
Okay.
So we might say, hey, look, I'll give you a simple example. We completely got rid of the onboarding pod. We don't have an onboarding pod. Instead, we've renamed it as journeys. What is important is that if you click on a ad of game that is, let's say, snakes and ladders, then when you open the app, you want to see snakes and ladders, right? You don't want to see something else. Stitching the journey together had become more important in our journey than to see how many SMSs failed, because we are already at 99% SLA.
Yeah.
There's not much more we can do, right? So that is a tough call that one needs to take. So you kill the pod and then think through more important problems that you can solve.
Is there any emotional baggage when a pod gets killed?
Yes, it was. So the baggage used to exist, but I think now it's slowly gone. It used to exist because a lot of the PMs felt it was a reflection on them. That, hey, look, my pod got killed, and maybe I'm not such a good PM. Once we change both from their progress in the company and their growth in the company to how they are evaluated and so on, and we said these are good things to do. If you kill a pod, it's actually good. But don't kill a pod when there are problems to solve. That's also terrible. But if there is not much more to do, then we should discuss that. And over 1 or 2 quarters, we transition into something better. So lots of great PMs have actually discussed and said, okay, we can't do anything more here. This is a bigger problem. Let's kill this or restructure this pod to start tackling this problem. And that's the way we have usually gone about the transition.
How do important problems get discovered? Where do they come from?
It's a combination. The best problems are actually given to us by our users. So we know we do constant VOC calls. We are in touch with customers I sit for an hour every week. Almost every PM will talk to customers at least for an hour, if not more. So we know the broader problems with the way they articulate. There's a little bit of an art of asking the right questions so that they tell you. Customers are also terrible at giving you solutions, so they just need to tell you their problems. Yeah, don't take solutions from them. So we hear the problem from there. So that's one discovery path. Second is sometimes we get ideas also by looking at certain other consumer apps within whether it's gaming or non-gaming, the other consumer apps that constantly does interesting things. So we see some of that. Usually our good ideas have actually come from outside of gaming also on the consumer side. So that's another part. Third is probably just like we know, for instance, we know that like a user will come to the app and they won't have enough matches, meaning they won't have somebody else that they can play against, right? This is very hard for a user to articulate. It's also very hard to get it through like matrices and so on. But you know that this is a problem because you know some fail rate is down. There are certain other smaller metrics that you can observe. So over time that becomes clear. And then you can think through creative solutions for specifically such problems. So that's another way of like maybe aggregated matrices that is sliced and diced slightly differently. And that also sometimes throws out.
Interesting. So you said you also look for inspiration and creativity of other consumer apps. Tell us a few.
Within gaming, lots of free to play, right? So we look at apps all across the world, including China. We look at the US. There's like all kinds of cool games that are out all the time. So we have actually an hour carved out where I sit with my team. We only play for an hour. So somebody selects a game, and we play a game for an hour. We'll take specific screenshots of what we think are very cool, and we have a repository where we put a list of things that anybody can access. So we do this an hour every week, right? And sometimes it's also offline board games that we play. It's not just online. So like various different forms of that. That's one. Then we look at things like, for example, there is this AstroTurf, which is, it's in the news. I think they were talking about giving 100 crores of credits, etc. So we have looked at some stuff around what the user behavior is like.
Yeah.
Why are people going and, what are they using it for? So we'll usually give like we do these deconstructs where PM said, okay, you know what? Why don't you take 10,000 rupees and just spend it on AstroTurf? Come back and tell us your experience. So they'll do things like that. And then you know what emotions they're feeling when they go and do some of these things. You can look at some of these new like fintech applications like Jar or Sovereign, etc. They all have various ways where they have gamified this piggy bank feature, which is there in some games also. So it sort of forces you to come back every day to the app and do some stuff, and then you get rewarded for that engagement. So those are maybe a couple examples that I can immediately think of.
So you made an interesting point about how every week you guys sit and play games, which is everyone's dream.
Yeah.
Get paid to play games. That is best case scenario. How do you hire PMs, and what are sort of the skill sets of great PMs? Because I imagine that is correlated to the joy of playing and obsession about nuances in the game and how they kind of think about it.
So for us, we measured three things. We look at bias for action, which I think is important at our scale. So we want someone who has executed very fast with some constraints, and usually that you get that knowledge through this. We follow, like for certain things, we follow the Amazonian way of interviewing and some Facebook way of interviewing. So using the standard like Amazon, and it's nothing, it's just asking more details about exactly what that particular individual did to ship something under constraints. And if they've actually done it, they'll be able to passionately tell you what they've done, right? So bias for action, very important. Then the second thing we look at is data orientation. We are also large enough that we can't only take subjective calls anymore. And the best of our PMs are able to like go very deep into the data. And this would be like things like, for example, they'd be able to say, look, when someone is playing a game of Ludo, they take a really long time to make the third move. And they take maybe like not so much time after the fifth move. So they will be able to, and then they go and look at the game and say, why does it take long for the third move to take so long, but not subsequent? And then you can make game design changes. You can make like, you can nudge them to play faster, whatever, right? So you can do the behavior that you need, but first you need to get to that level. So data and being able to be understand what data is important, instrument, and have the right analytics is very important. So second part. Third and most subjective part is what we loosely call as product sense. It's a term that I think Facebook coined, which is some sort of intuition on what will work with our TG. And you get better as you've managed the same product for a longer period of time. But that is where you're empathetic with the user, but you're also able to say that if I do this, the user behavior will change. If I do this, it will not change. So it's a little subjective. We usually do this with like a jam session. So we invite the candidate over. We take a problem statement that's a true issue for us, and we solve it with the candidate. And you can think through the way they're structuring the problem, what metrics they're looking at. How are they thinking through this? Just the direction itself is important. So these would be the three key areas for us. Fourth, and a good to have, is passion for gaming. What we have seen is like there are people who haven't been passionate about gaming, but once they join, they love games. Okay, so that's why it's not as much of a prerequisite, because we've seen that most PMs, as soon as they join, they love playing. Very few don't. So that's why it's like, okay, I know that you must have some inclination. As long as you have that, that's fine. If you hate gaming, then it's probably not the place. But yeah, those would be the 3 or 4 things that, yeah.
Every time I meet a bunch of founders, we always talk about how during COVID, it was basically just out of mind, out of sight. Nobody really figured how we grew this big.
Yeah.
Without fully understanding the implications of it and how complex it is to actually get stuff done in the remote world. And so a lot of people prefer coming to the office. But how do you get the team excited to come to the office?
Good food. We have amazing food in our cafeteria. I love it. But I think the teams come for a few reasons. I think they really enjoy problem solving together. Right? I think
that's true for PMs. But is that true for engineers?
I think so. I think there is like there's this intellectual curiosity / some sort of stimulation that is very visceral for most people. Even for the designers, for example, how they're thinking of the designs and so on, and they want it to be like a collaborative and fun effort.
Yeah.
So we do like various, like our problem solving isn't just sitting in a room. We do various cool things. We'll do stickies. We'll have different people draw things. We will have these deconstructs. We have various ways to make the problem solving session really fun. Like I can tell you that the game sessions, actually we call it Play Games 1.0. That's what the meeting is called. I think in the last 1 year, we haven't ever missed it. It's Friday morning. We do it Friday morning.
I can believe that.
Yeah, 10 to 11, right? So people actually come into work. They want to do it. So some of these things get them very excited. So they come in, and then outside of that, we have few other things that the people team has kept it pretty exciting. So they have like we throw like casual Friday like happy hours, so people can get together there. We have a lot of play tests. So every new game there's a play test, and whoever reports the best bug gets a cash prize. right? And these are like you can actually win like, I don't know, 5-10K if you get the right, and we actually sit and look at, so you get a big bug tracker through that. So people like to come test out games, do some of this. These are some of the reasons I think people come in.
Yeah.
Apart from, of course, we have good food, good coffee. We actually have like now an AeroPress and all kinds of fancy. Yeah.
Awesome. One of the things that is very interesting about MPL is how competitive it is, right? And how not just competitive, but also its constant creativity. So, how do you kind of balance the two?
Look, I think one trap that we people get caught up in is to see what stuff competition is doing, and what we have seen. And this is, I actually now truly believe this is the case. Everything that we have ever copied has never worked for us. Whatever we have copied from, when I say copied, like a competitor has literally the same product and they've launched a new feature, we go and launch that. Never made us money. It may be even making them money, but somehow it doesn't make us any money. Our users hate it, right? So I don't know if we have a different set of users. So far there's been zero, right? So what we say is go see what they're doing, analyze it, understand it, and adapt it to what we need. Don't bring the exact same thing, because it's okay to be more thoughtful and maybe even be a little late.
Yeah.
Be 2 weeks late, and that's okay. But don't launch junk, because the cost is very high. You will launch something that you're not even convinced about because somebody else did it. Then you realize, so that takes 2 weeks. Then it takes 2 weeks to sort of come back and say, okay, this is not working.
Yeah.
Then I'm going to iterate on it because you have now launched it. Then it takes 2 more weeks to launch some, version 2. Another 2 weeks to know, okay, actually this whole thing was a bad idea. So it's better to like take a month, launch something that will work within our context. So that's the way we have tried to solve some competitive pressure to being creative. We also, other advantage that we had is, as a strategy, we already have a slightly differentiated strategy compared to our competitors. Most of our competitors focus on one game. So if you want to play poker, there's one game. If you want to play fantasy, there's one game, right? And so on and so forth. We are probably the only platform at meaningful scale. So just having a strategy of being able to put like 15, 20 games itself is like is very nice, because we don't have to really think through what like the poker guy did yesterday. It's fine. No, we'll do it maybe next month. We won't do it. It's okay.
Cool. Guys, we can keep going forever. This is an infinite conversation, but we're already at 8 p.m. We started at 5:30. We've been at it. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you for inviting
Thank
me.
you for stopping by on a Saturday evening.
Sure.
I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation.